My name's Jo Burnham, and I'm going to talk to you today about a little known link between Warsash, a village on the South Hampshire coast, and the White House in Washington DC. I came across the connection when looking at the 1881 census for the area. The 29-year-old son of the head of the household was living in Warsash House with his son and two daughters, but his wife wasn't present. I noticed that his eldest son had been born in the USA. And spoiler alert, 10 years later, the 39-year-old was living on his own and downsized in Warsash Cottage with 5 servants and no family. I was intrigued and wondered if there was a story there. I didn't expect to find out that the 18th President of the United States had spent a week in Warsash. Warsash is a small village on the south coast of Hampshire. It sits between the Solent and the mouth of the River Hamble. In the 19th century, it was known for crab and lobster teas and boat building. It also had a number of large estates, one of which was the Warsash House estate, with its wonderful views over the River Hamble. Colonel Swinton sold Passage House to Edward Sartoris in 1868, who was of Swiss ancestry. He was a Liberal politician and the MP for Carmarthenshire, where he owned a property called Llangennec Park. He made extensive improvements to give it a more Italian style and renamed Passage House Warsash House. There was a hall, 6 reception rooms, 5 bathrooms and 17 bedrooms and dressing rooms. Edward Sartoris famously purchased a local pub in Warsash called the Shipwrights Arms just so he could close it down because he said it was too noisy. He was, however, an enthusiastic sportsman and yachtsman, and his yacht won the Hamble Regatta in 1878. Edward's wife was an internationally famous Victorian opera singer called Adelaide Kemble. The Times newspaper reviewed her debut at the Covent Garden Theatre on the 3rd of November 1841. When she married Edward in 1843, she had to give up her work as an opera singer, so her rise to prominence must have been very quick, partly due to the fame of her theatrical family. Edward and Adelaide entertained many high-profile visitors at Warsash House, including Edward VII when he was the Prince of Wales, the artist Sir Frederick Leighton and the writer Henry James. They had 3 children, Grenville, born in 1843, May, born in 1845, and Algernon, born in 1851. We'll come back to Algernon shortly. We'll now turn to the 18th American President Ulysses Grant and his family in the White House when he was elected in 1868. Before he was president, General Grant commanded the Northern Army in the American Civil War. The president's only daughter, Ellen, was known as Nellie. She was 13 when the family moved into the White House. I found myself thinking of Chelsea Clinton when I heard this, and sure enough, Chelsea was a month off her 13th birthday when the Clintons moved to the White House. Nellie was sent to Miss Porter's elite boarding school in Connecticut. However, she hated it there and sent 3 telegrams to her father, who eventually agreed she could return to the White House. She attracted a lot of attention from reporters when she was a teenager, so her father arranged for her to tour Europe when she was 16 to keep her out of the limelight. She attended many parties but was always chaperoned. Queen Victoria received Nellie at Buckingham Palace on the 25th of April 1872. She wrote in her journal that day that Nellie was rather stiff and offhand in her manner but spoke with a great twang. Sounds like a typical teenager to me. Nellie Grant and Algernon Sartoris were both travelling from England to New York on the Cunard Line steamer Russia in 1872. He was nearly 22 and Nellie had just turned 17. Nellie's chaperones, Mr. and Mrs. Borry, were both ill and had to stay in their cabin, leaving Nellie to remain on deck where she met Algernon. Algernon by then was a young officer in the army. He was assigned to the British legation in Washington, but he preferred to spend his time playing sports. Although some said he could be arrogant, boastful, crude, and obnoxious, he clearly also had a charming side to him, and indeed, young Nellie did fall for him. When Algernon knew that Nellie was keen to agree to his marriage proposal, he first had to gain her father's consent. Grant invited Algernon to the White House to play billiards, and it was there that Algernon asked for his daughter's hand in marriage. President Grant's secretary said it was truly an act of courage for Algernon to meet the president to ask for his permission, particularly as the president wanted his daughter to remain in America. Algernon made it clear that he intended to raise his family in Warsash. In July 1873, the president wrote to Edward Sartoris at Warsash House to express his concern about the marriage and find out about Algernon's past regarding other women, his character, and his prospects. Some say that Edward told the president that his son drank too much alcohol. Ulysses Grant had himself battled rumours of alcoholism. Nellie's mother, Julia, asked her daughter if she really wanted to leave the comforts of home to set up a life with a complete stranger. And Nellie replied, "Why, yes, Mama, I'm sure that's what you did when you married Papa and left Grandpa." Julia remembered that her father had similarly disapproved of her marrying Ulysses because he did not think he had any prospects, and he ended up being the president. So eventually the president reluctantly agreed to the marriage, and on the 7th of July 1873 he wrote another letter to Edward Sartoris to give permission, provided that they wait at least a year. So they were married in the White House on the 21st of May 1874. One account said Sartoris was dashing in his manner, and Nellie was described as probably the most attractive of all the young women who have ever lived at the White House. The lace on her dress cost $1,500, and their wedding presents were valued at $60,000, and that's around $2 million today. The ceremony was held in the East Room, and the walls, staircases, and chandeliers were decorated with lily of the valley and orange blossoms from Florida. The New York Herald said 250 guests were present. During the ceremony, they stood under a huge bell made of white flowers, which was a present from friends in New York. After the ceremony, they passed through an aisle of 12 Army and Navy officers in uniform. Algernon's parents didn't attend the wedding, as their eldest son, Grenville, had died 7 months earlier, aged 30, when he fell off a horse. At that time, the period of mourning lasted over a year, and so they were represented by the British ambassador, Sir Edward Thornton, and his wife. Thornton Avenue in Warsash was named after this connection when it was built over the site of Warsash House after it was demolished in 1937. Here is the menu from the wedding day, including soft crabs on toast, broiled spring chickens, and ice cream. After the wedding breakfast, they travelled to New York in a private railway carriage covered in British and American flags and sailed to Southampton the next day on the White Star liner Baltic. The captain even gave them his cabin. In 1877, President Grant and his wife, Julia, visited them in Warsash and stayed at Warsash House for a week as part of their European tour once Grant had left office. Their grandson, Algernon Jr., had just been born that year. Sadly, Algernon and Nellie's first son, Grant Grenville, died the year before when he was a baby. And they also had 2 daughters later, Vivian in 1879 and Rosemary in 1880. Vivian later married the second cousin of Theodore Roosevelt. Algernon frequently hired a photographer to take pictures of himself, so I'm sure he would have loved Instagram. He also enjoyed trammel fishing at night with his friends in a boat called Double Ration, and he had a cricket pitch made near Warsash House in 1874. He was known in the area for having the fastest pony and trap to quickly dash off to the nearest train station. The young couple were the subject of a lot of press coverage, mostly celebrity gossip about their lives. Unfortunately, it was reported that Nellie didn't seem to like English society, so the English people didn't warm to her either. The British press do seem to have a habit of blaming American brides. In 1888, the author Henry James visited Warsash House and enjoyed the conversation over dinner, but said, "Poor little Nellie Grant sits speechless on the sofa, understanding neither head nor tail. She's illiterate, lovely, painted, and separated from a drunken idiot of a husband. The Sartorises don't like her much, but they like her more, I suppose, than they do their disreputable Algy. Whenever I see her, there is something rather touching and tragic to me, in a strange land, quite without friends." Algernon was often absent from their home in Warsash, and within a few years of their wedding, the couple were rarely seen together. Nellie generally spent the summer months with her parents in America. Algernon and Nellie inherited Warsash House from Edward Sartoris when he died in 1888. However, by 1889, Algernon's drinking problem was described as out of control, and he had a reputation as a womanizer. There had been an article in the New York Times in June 1883 alleging that he had an affair in Milwaukee with a woman called Mrs. Bush, and the rumours, unfortunately, did not stop. So Nellie was granted a divorce in 1889, given a large income, and allowed to return to America with their children. Algernon Charles Frederick Sartoris died from pneumonia in Capri 4 years later, aged 42. Nellie and the children inherited Warsash House, but returned to America in 1894, and she eventually remarried in 1912, but died 10 years later, aged 67. So that is the sad story of Algernon and Nellie Sartoris, which I found out after becoming curious about their family details on the census. If you're interested in the history of Warsash and the surrounding areas, please do get in touch with Warsash Local History Society. Thank you.